It's a good bounce back win for us today. I thought we started the game with the right tone on the defensive end, and so that was that was by design for us to get back to our.
Something happened behind closed doors at Team USA that nobody was supposed to talk about. The kind of thing that gets buried under press releases and carefully worded statements until it doesn't. Until someone in a position of authority sits down and confirms what everyone had already been whispering about for months. Coach Cheryl Reeve didn't mince words. She didn't dodge the question or give the usual, "we're all focused on winning" non-answer. She looked straight ahead and said what she said. And just like that, the most talked about rivalry in women's basketball stopped being a rumor, music, and became something very, very real. But to understand why this moment hit so hard, you have to go back to where it all started. Because this tension didn't appear out of nowhere. It was building, for a long time, piece by piece, game by game. See, slight by music, slight. And if you've been paying attention, you already knew something was going to give. Caitlin Clark's rise was unlike anything women's basketball had seen in decades. Coming out of Iowa, she wasn't just good. She was appointment television. She broke scoring records that had stood since before most of her current teammates were born. She brought a level of attention to the women's game that even her harshest critics couldn't deny. Arenas that used to be half full, music, were suddenly sold out. Television ratings climbed in ways networks hadn't projected. She brought casual fans in, brought back lapsed fans, and created an entirely new generation of people who had never cared about the WNBA before. That kind of cultural weight doesn't come without a music cost, though. When one person becomes the face of a movement, everyone else in that movement has to figure out where they stand in relation to it. Music. Some players embraced the rising tide. Others, not so much. Angel Reese came into this story from a completely different angle. Her path ran through LSU, through a national championship, through a moment at the final Music 4, where she pointed at her ring finger in response to Clark's own trash talk from earlier in the season. That image music went everywhere. It was provocative and confident and polarizing all at once. Reese wasn't shy about her own star power either. She had her own fan base, her own brand deals, her own narrative about what she represented. In a league that had spent years struggling for mainstream attention, suddenly there were two players who could each headline a conversation on their own. And they played in the same draft class and the same rookie year, the same Olympics conversation. That kind of proximity music, when two strong personalities are orbiting the same spotlight, creates friction, whether anyone music intends it or not. The 2024 Paris Olympics. Selection process was where things first started getting genuinely complicated. Clark, despite her historic college career and her immediate WNBA impact, was initially left off the Team USA roster. The decision stunned fans and ignited a debate that consumed sports media for weeks. USA Basketball cited a need for experienced international players and pointed to the depth music of talent available. Critics called it political. They called it personal. Social media fractured completely day with one side, arguing that the decision was purely basketball-based, and another insisting that something more calculated was happening behind the scenes. Reese was also not on that original roster, but the discourse around her absence was quieter, less explosive. The difference in how those two absences were discussed said everything about the different kind of pressure each player was generating. When Clark did eventually get her opportunities, music, and continued to produce, the narrative around her relationship with the established WNBA players grew more layered. Music. Veteran players had spent years building the league with less money, less coverage, and significantly less fanfare. Some of them weren't subtle about their feelings when a rookie arrived and immediately became the most talked about player in the sport. There were moments on the court, hard music fouls, confrontations, physical play that got replayed and debated endlessly online. Music. Every interaction between Clark and any opposing player got put under a microscope. Every battle between Clark and Reese specifically got dissected frame by frame. Were they genuinely competing hard, the way elite athletes do, or was something more personal happening? The line between competitive intensity and actual animosity is thin. And in this case, nobody could quite agree on where it sat. What made the Team USA dynamic so explosive was music, that it forced these two players into the same environment under the most pressure-filled circumstances imaginable. Olympic preparation camps are intense. They involve players fighting for spots, players navigating egos, music coaches managing personalities, and everyone dealing with the knowledge, music, that the entire world is watching. When you put Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese in that room together, with all of the baggage that came with both of their names, you were essentially putting a lit match next to something flammable and hoping nothing caught. According to what's been reported, music, and what Coach Reeve eventually confirmed, something caught. Music. Practice sessions got heated. The competitive edge that made both of them great didn't disappear just because they were wearing the same uniform. If anything, that shared uniform made it worse because now the competition wasn't just between them. It was internal. An internal competition with this much external scrutiny is almost impossible to manage cleanly. The confirmation from Coach Reeve didn't come wrapped in drama, and it wasn't a press conference designed to create headlines. It came in the way these things often do. Through a candid conversation that someone decided to push a little further than expected. When asked music directly about the tension between Clark and Reeve didn't retreat to safe language. She acknowledged that there were real moments of conflict, that the two players had genuine friction that went beyond normal competitive intensity, that what people had been speculating about online wasn't just fan fiction. There was a real dynamic there that the coaching staff had to manage. The phrase that got picked up everywhere, the one that spread across every sports account and basketball forum within hours, was blunt and unambiguous. They actually fought, not metaphorically, and not in the they were competing hard sense that coaches use when they want to acknowledge tension without confirming it. Actually fought. The confirmation sent everything into overdrive. Now, fought in the context of a basketball practice can mean a range of things. It can mean a shoving match. It can mean a verbal blow-up that got physical for a moment. It can mean the kind of altercation that gets broken up music immediately and never happens again, but leaves a mark on the team chemistry. What it almost certainly doesn't mean is a full-scale brawl in the traditional sense. These are professional athletes in a controlled environment with coaches and staff present. But it also clearly wasn't nothing. When a coach of Cheryl Reeve's stature, someone who has spent decades in this league, uses that specific language to describe what happened between two players, she's making a deliberate choice. She knows exactly what those words will do. She knows they'll generate conversation, spark debate, and force a reckoning with something that had been glossed over. Whether that was her intention or not is its own interesting question. The reaction split almost exactly the way you'd expect it to. Clark supporters read the confirmation as validation, proof that their player had been treated unfairly, that the hostility they'd been CD Makert Salm Dashis and Dakursakan pointing to for months was real and not imagined. They pointed to the physical fouls, the subtle disrespect, the moments where Clark seemed to be treated differently than a player of her profile should be treated. CN said the practice confrontation was the inevitable result of an environment that had been allowed to get toxic. Reese supporters read it differently. Music. They saw a narrative being constructed around their player that painted her as the aggressor. Music, the difficult one, the obstacle. When she was simply competing at the same level she always had. They pointed out that competitive fire music gets celebrated in men's sports and pathized in women's sports, and that the entire framing of the situation was unfair to Reeve before anyone even knew the full details. What neither side was fully willing to sit with was the music possibility that both things could be true simultaneously. D. Clark could have faced genuine hostility from some corners of the league. And some of that hostility could have been a proportionate reaction to the way her arrival was covered and music positioned. Ree could have been an active participant in real friction. Music, and that friction could have been driven by genuine competitive tension rather than anything malicious. Sports media and social media, even more so, doesn't do well with complexity. It wants villains and heroes. It wants a clean story with an obvious takeaway. The Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese situation refused to be that. And that refusal is actually what kept it in the conversation for so long. The broader context of what this conflict represents is worth slowing down for. Women's basketball was for most of its professional existence in America, a sport that survived on passion rather than mainstream attention. The players who built the WNBA did so with salaries that would make their male counterparts laugh in arenas that weren't always full, with media coverage that was generous on a good day. Then, the landscape shifted almost overnight. NIL deals changed what it meant to be a college athlete. Social media gave athletes music direct access to audiences that used to require traditional media as a middleman. And Caitlin Clark specifically became a phenomenon that accelerated all of those changes at a speed nobody had fully prepared for. When you compress that much change into that short a time frame, the human beings inside the system feel the pressure. Some of them handle it gracefully, some of them don't. And what happened at Team USA Practice Music was a pressure valve releasing, a predictable outcome of an impossible situation. The question everyone kept asking after the Reeve confirmation was, what does this mean for their future? Both Clark and Ree are young. Both are going to be in this league for a long time if they stay music healthy. Both are going to be in conversations about national teams, about endorsements, about the direction of women's basketball for the foreseeable future. Can two players who literally came to blows in practice coexist in a shared professional space? The short answer is yes, and it happens all the time in sports. LeBron James had well-documented tensions with teammates and opponents that eventually faded into professional respect. Music-odd competitors who despise each other on the court often develop a grudging mutual acknowledgement once the stakes lower slightly. Music. The intensity that causes conflict is often the same intensity that drives excellence. And elite athletes understand that about each other even when they can't stand each other personally. What made observers more nervous wasn't the fight itself. It was the infrastructure around it. The online armies on both sides of this debate are enormous, passionate, and not particularly interested in nuance or de-escalation. Every interaction between Clark and Ree gets fed into a machine that turns it into content, controversy, and outrage currency. That machine doesn't benefit from resolution. It benefits from ongoing conflict. So even if Clark and Ree themselves found a way to move past what happened, the forces surrounding them would keep the narrative alive, keep assigning meaning to every look and every post and every moment where their paths crossed. The fight, now confirmed, becomes a reference point that never fully disappears. It gets brought up the next time they're on the same team. It gets brought up the next time they play against each other. It gets brought up in every discussion about women's basketball politics for years. The Team USA coaching staff's handling of the situation has been its own subplot. Cheryl Reeve is one of the most respected coaches in the history of the WNBA. She's not someone known for loose lips or careless statements. When she confirmed the conflict, music, she had to know what she was doing. To some, read it as an attempt to get ahead of a story that was going to come out anyway. Better to acknowledge it on her own terms than have it leak in a more damaging way. Others read it as frustration with a media environment that keeps oversimplifying what is genuinely complex team-building work. Managing elite athletes with competing agendas and enormous external platforms is harder than it looks. And maybe Reeve wanted people to understand that what she was dealing with wasn't a normal roster management chakrik Insiber ADC days or Cedar ADs knocker read or Indialinge. Music. Whatever her reasoning, the confirmation changed the story permanently. Music. There's a version of this saga that ends well. Clark and Ree both have long careers, both win championships. Both look back at the friction of their early years as the forge that sharpened them. Now they do a sit-down interview in 10 years where they're gracious about each other and reflective about how much pressure they were both under.